It says off. It's on. Hello? Hello. We've got you, yes. Good afternoon and welcome back to the conference. It is a great delight for me to be chair for this afternoon's session. I'm Margaret Yeve. I work on the principles of knowing, science, humanities and theology in the University of Oxford. Very grateful to Eric for the invitation and to Nancy for being here at such an exciting conference and conferral. I often am asked, what is it like to be married? And I say, when it's like jumping out of a 100-story building. When you pass floor 65, you say, so far, so good. Today, we have probably got past floor 40, and I think it's absolutely marvellous. So,
wait a second, my thumb's the last one, right?
Right. So let me introduce quickly to you now Andrew Chignell from Cornell University, who is speaking for us on the topic Kant on hoping for a miracle.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me with this microphone here? Is that all right? Louder? Closer? Maybe I'll lean like this. Is that better? Okay. Thanks to the organizers and to everyone for a really enjoyable time so far. I was meant to be the kind of transition person between Leibniz and Kant. I was going to talk a little bit more about Leibniz than it turns out that I will. Naively, I thought that you could talk about both of these philosophers in a short period of time, but quickly learned that it's far too difficult, and there's bits of the Kant stuff that I wanted to run past some of the people here, and so I thought I would play up the Kant, and I'll say some things about Leibniz, but not as much as I would have liked. The other thing is that I was also planning until recently to have a PowerPoint, and Eric informed me a few days ago that we wouldn't be able to do that. So I had a PowerPoint with lots of, those funny graphics of various different miracles, which won't be able to be here to keep you awake. So he promised that either he or some of the student assistants would get up on cue and perform a small miracle if need be. I'm not sure who volunteered for that, but when everybody's getting really sleepy, I'll nod in your direction. Okay. Kant sees more clearly than other people in the early modern period, I think, that faith about supersensible things, even if it is rational, is categorically different from the kinds of attitudes we take towards humdrum propositions about the objects of experience or toward necessary truths. It's not just a difference in degree, or a difference in degree of justification. According to Kant, rather, it's a difference in kind of attitude and kind of justification. In some passages, he describes it as belief or faith. The German word is Glaube. Doesn't really have a great German word doesn't have a great English translation. In other places, he calls it Annehmung, acceptance. Either way, though, he makes it clear that this kind of assent, holding for true, that's the kind of genus of which these are various species, that this kind of assent differs from the conviction involved in knowledge, hypothesis, as well as opinion. So you'll see the little diagram at the beginning of your handout. I won't discuss that. That's from actually some older work, but that gives you a picture of the sort of general framework of these propositional attitudes. Given that the main point here is just that when I talk about belief with a capital B, it's not what we call belief in the sort of contemporary sense. So when I'm talking about belief in the contemporary sense, which is a little bit closer to what he calls assent, holding for true, though not exactly coextensive, then I'll say belief in the contemporary sense. So here the capital B when I say belief for the most part. Given that paradigmatic instances of belief, including the postulates of practical reason, have to do with the supersensible entities of traditional monotheism, it comes as a surprise when Kant says at the very end of the first critique that religion is not primarily concerned with belief, but rather with hope. In the canon of pure reason, Kant says that all of our rational interests are united in three fundamental questions: what can I know? What should I do? What may I hope? And that the answer to the third question is the one that is given in a philosophy of religion. Many commentators just ignore this by lumping belief and hope together, but in fact, I think hope is yet another kind of attitude, one that we can rationally take towards doctrines that are not able to be brought within the bounds of pure reason. But why does Kant think that questions about mere hope are what concern us in religion? As just noted, Kant's own discussions of God's existence, the immortality of the soul, in the critiques, are themselves conducted in terms of Glaube, in terms of belief, and the Christian creeds he would have known refer explicitly to belief rather than hope. Indeed, the German term credo, there is a German term credo, like our words creed or credence, are taken from the Latin credere, to believe. Even when the traditional object of the virtue of hope, namely the afterlife and things like that, is referenced in those creeds, it's in doxastic terms. I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting, says the creed that is recited in nearly every Lutheran and Catholic Mass. So why the switch to hope at the end of the first critique? A possible answer to the question is that Kant thinks that the various needs and interests of reason described in the critiques can motivate firm belief, and that when a stronger attitude is available, we should adopt it. So a kind of assert the stronger principle. The postulates are not robust religious doctrines so much as the fundamental tenets of reason itself. The role of a philosophy of religion, then, is to see what, if anything, could be added to these postulates by performing the experiment exemplified in the book Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone. As described in the second preface, the religion is not a critique of pure hope exactly, but it does seek to display the extent to which pieces of an alleged revelation, in this case the New Testament one, can be brought within or at least close to the ambit of rational belief. So that's one answer to the question. And another possible answer to the question, one that was mentioned earlier, is this. Perhaps Kant noticed that what many religious people have towards these more robust and kind of particularist revealed doctrines doesn't look or feel like firm belief. In focusing on the question, what may I hope, we encounter an approach to religion that turns away from the focus on knowledge, epistemic justification, and belief that dominates the contemporary analytic discussion, as well as the focus on non-epistemic justification and Kantian belief or faith that dominates discussion among contemporary Kantians, in order to consider the kinds of attitudes that I submit many religious people actually have towards the kind of robust and particular doctrines, such as the doctrine of grace, say, that many religious people actually contemplate, especially in liturgical and devotional contexts. In the next section, I spend some time trying to isolate our intuitions about the proper objects of hope, and thus about the conditions under which hope is rationally permitted. In the third section, I sketch a way in which the appeal to hope, rather than to belief, or belief in the contemporary sense, might resolve one of the long-standing conundrums in Kant's philosophy of religion. So section 2, and this one's truncated. You can see on the handout there are a bunch of things I would have talked about if there were time, but I'll only say a few of the things that I'd like to here. Ideally, a long project about hope in Kant or anyone else would say something about the objects of hope, the nature of hope, goals of hope, and so forth, in order to understand the role that this attitude plays for us, for Kant, for later figures in our cognitive, affective, and religious lives. Here, I mostly restrict the focus to the first issue about the legitimate objects of hope, or, to put it another way, the objects of rational hope. So, what do we hope for? Or rather, what may we hope for? Or, for grammatical sticklers, for what may we hope? An initially appealing answer might just be anything at all. I mean, there are no rational constraints on hope beyond maybe rational constraints on desire. If someone were to believe things that were deeply implausible, many of us would be tempted to haul out our W.K. Clifford and tell him that he ought not believe without sufficient evidence. But, so this line of thought goes, mere hope doesn't provoke such responses, no matter what it is for. Let 1,000 hopeful flowers bloom. Further reflection, however, suggests that there are some minimal rational constraints in the region. Suppose I told you that I really hope to become a married bachelor this year. You wouldn't think, that's something really daring to hope for, or that scoundrel, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. Rather, you'd be puzzled or worried, or think that I'm deluded or malfunctioning, or at the very least suspect that I haven't grasped the concept of bachelor or marriage adequately. One simply can't reasonably hope to be a married bachelor. It's a conceptual impossibility. So it seems that there are rational constraints on hope that are related to the modal status of its propositional objects. Perhaps this is what is behind Kant's statement of his third question. What may I hope for? The verb is dürfen, to be allowed to, permitted to. But are these constraints then merely conceptual, logical, or are they broader than that? In order to sketch the general pattern here and the principles underlying it, it would be useful to consider a series of examples, starting with weaker notions like the probable, the improbable, then returning to various conceptions of necessity and impossibility and so forth, focusing in each case on the hoping subject's evaluation of the proposition's status rather than any objective probability or modal status it enjoys. I can't do all of that here, and so I'm just going to say a few things about causal modality and then ask you to take for granted some of what I think the results would be if we were able to go through all of these different examples. So consider causally impossible situations. I managed to fly around the room above your heads just by flapping my arms right now. Seems like it would violate some causal laws. The dead rise. A man walks into a fiery furnace and doesn't burn. These are miracles, right? Miracles aren't just unlikely, they're causally impossible, or so we tend to think. There are few philosophers, we've talked about Malebranche and Leibniz, who conceive of miracles as in accordance with a higher order, even though they are ruled out by the lower or subordinate laws of nature that we aim to capture in scientific theories. But suppose for a moment with Locke and Kant, as I read them, that miracles are genuine causal impossibilities. They involve the suspension of the natural order or the impeding of normal causal powers. Kant characterizes miracle in one place as interruption of the order of nature. That's an empirical miracle. Regarding a miracle so conceived, other things being equal, it would be crazy to expect that it will happen, or to believe in the contemporary sense, or to opine even that it will happen, even though we might admire someone. I mean, in some sense, we do admire somebody who expects a miracle in a given situation. Ways, I think, of admiring them that are still consistent with thinking that they're a little bit irrational or crazy. On the other hand, we can reasonably want the miracle to happen or wish that it had happened if it doesn't. So it looks like the constraints on rational desire and wish are much looser than the constraints on rational belief. So what about hope? Can we rationally hope for what we justifiably take to be causally impossible? I'm actually a little uncertain about this. It can seem as though the answer depends on whether we emphasize the terms reasonably or hope in the relevant sentence. Can I reasonably hope that a 99-year-old woman can conceive a child, or that I can fly away just by flapping my arms? The standards for reasonable hope rise dramatically when the question is stated in this way, and now it seems as though the answer is clearly no. Can I reasonably hope, just hope, that the dead will rise and greet us tomorrow, or that the sun will not? Now the emphasis is on hope and its ability to reflect a sunny, optimistic disposition. Although if the sun doesn't shine on us, I suppose it's not so much of a sunny, optimistic disposition. And the standards go down such that hoping seems okay. It's just hope, after all. A line from a poem, hope, that mere slip of a girl. No problem, hoping for even causal impossibilities. That said, if I have background beliefs about the existence of a super being, Superman, Zeus, God, etc., who can suspend causal powers or laws, then such hope may be reasonable no matter how you state the proposition, even without, perhaps, knowing anything about that being's powers and intentions. If I do happen to know something about that being's general intentions, and if I justifiably believe that the being has reason to suspend the normal